Today we're out in the shop and we're going to talk about getting your spark ignition model engine to run. Maybe it's an old model airplane engine, a bolt engine, or just an antique stationary engine that you want to get running. Maybe you built it yourself in your workshop and you're having trouble getting it going. So I'm going to run through setup for spark ignition, and then we'll talk about troubleshooting, and then we'll run the engine. Okay, here's an engine that I recently completed. It's the Elmer Wall 10cc water witch. It has a 1-inch bore. Here's the piston and the 2 cast iron rings. These are 1/16 inch rings. This piston is just machined from a piece of 1.25 inch aluminum bar stock. So I made these little fuel tanks out of a piece of copper. This uses a 1977 General Motors point set, and they're available. You can get them on eBay or Advanced Auto Parts, something like that, for like anywhere from $12 to $15. You could probably find them at a flea market for much cheaper. The first thing I want to talk about is when you come across an old engine like this and you want to run it, it's very tempting to just put it in the vise, clamp the engine in the vise. I would urge you not to do that. It's so easy to damage these crankcases. They're just made of, usually it's aluminum casting. And if you clamp it in the vise, it's going to not only leave marks on it, which maybe it's a valuable engine and that will degrade the value. What I do is just take, this is a piece of 2x6 lumber scrap that I just sanded and mounted the engine to this. Now, you know, a vise is a convenient place. You can clamp the wood in the vise and then use it that way. But what I generally do is put my little mount here on the workbench, convenient spot, and then I clamp the mount to the workbench. If you have an engine that vibrates a lot, you might want to use 2 clamps. Okay, what do you need? So besides your engine, let's say you bought it off eBay, whatever, you found it at a flea market, you know, does it have a set of points? Does it have contact points? A lot of these engines use, as this one does, like 1970s, 77 General Motors GM V8 points. These are metal. You can buy these at Advanced Auto Parts at $12, $15 for a whole set. Some of the 2-stroke older model engines had various forms of points. Anyway, so you need a set of points. Make sure your engine has a set of points. If it doesn't, you can buy them. You'll need a battery box. Well, I'm using just a black battery box here that I got hardware store, eBay, who knows. These come in aluminum and also black plastic. Radio Shack had these for years. Holds 2 D-cell batteries. These are 1.5 volts. You need 2. You'll need a coil. The coil is an old model airplane coil, 3 volts. These are available on eBay. There's Aero Electric in Galesburg, Michigan. Sells these for about $35. There's a Mecca, which is a Model-Engine Collectors Association, and they have a website where you can find things for sale for the older antique model engines. They still compete sometimes with the old timer event, and they have to use spark ignition engines and coils. So these coils are still available. I think that I got this one on eBay. They have the high tension lead that goes to the spark plug, and then the positive and negative side of the battery. So you need a coil, and of course you need the spark plug. Champion used to actually make these spark plugs. The one I'm using is a Champion V, which is a 3/8 24 thread Champion V spark plug. You're going to need some hookup wire. About 14 gauge is good. It's not real critical. I use 14 gauge. I use red for the positive, just to keep everything neat. And I've got a couple of these little alligator clips. And black, of course, for the negative. So you get your hookup wire, your coil, your batteries in your battery box, spark plug, and your points. Once you got all those, you want a capacitor or a condenser. This is just a 0.2 to 0.02 to 0.04 microfarad MF. It'll say it right on there. 0.02 MF capacitor, also known as a condenser. It helps prevent sparking or arcing at the points themselves. So then you'll need some fuel. Most of these engines run on just regular gasoline, but a lot of people use Coleman's fuel or camp fuel called white gas. You can get this at Walmart than gasoline. It doesn't smell as bad. It's easier to get off your hands. I also use Marvel Mystery Oil, a few drops mixed in with every tank. A source of spark plugs is DeBolt Machining. They make rimfire spark plugs. There are various dealers around the country that sell rimfire Modell-Engine spark plugs. Those rimfire spark plugs usually sell for $25, something like that. You can find them. You can find these spark plugs on eBay quite often. That from $20 to, you don't pay more than $30 for one of these new in the box. The company that sells these online is called Morrison and Marvin Engine Works, and they make a rimfire exact copy of the old Champion V plug. They also make a rimfire V3, which is the 1/4 32 thread for the smaller. Some of the real smaller old engines used 1/4 32 thread, exactly like our modern day glow plug. Those are 1/4 32 threads. And Go plugs. They have these new for sale. I think they're brand new. They are $25 a piece. Okay, you got your plug, you got your points, and your engine's all ready to go. First thing you want to do is find some good batteries. D-cell batteries. I like to check these to make sure they're 1.5 volts. I put them in the battery holder, get them all hooked up. Make sure my engine is mounted. Now, one of the things, once you get it all set up, before you try to crank it, check the timing of your spark. Because it won't start if the timing is off. And you just don't know where it is if it's been sitting on a shelf for 30 years or whatever. So I'm going to take the spark plug out and I'll show you how to check the timing. These old spark plugs use a 1/2 inch wrench on these. So I take the spark plug out. Be sure you don't lose the copper compression ring for the spark plug. You take a screwdriver. I use this as an Allen wrench. It's rounded on the nose so it doesn't scratch the top of the piston. I put it right down, and you can use a thin pencil and turn the flywheel over and feel until you get the top dead center. That's when the piston is at the top of its stroke. And make sure you're top dead center. Now what I like to do is take a Sharpie and I put a big mark on here that says TDC right here. If you don't want to mark the flywheel up, I mean this mark, if you use a little alcohol, you can just wipe it right off. Sharpie dissolves with alcohol. So now I know where top dead center is every time I turn my flywheel over. Screwdriver going up and down. So when I know it's at top dead center, right there, that's where the spark should fire. You're going to see the setups where they suggest that you set the spark to fire before top dead center, like 5 degrees, 10 degrees, depending on the particular engine. Auto manufacturers in the car maintenance manual, they set this up. It might be a lot more or less than this. But for an old model engine that doesn't have spark advance or anything like that, just to get it started, relatively low RPM, you can set it to fire right at top dead center and it will run. I like to build some of these model engines from articles in old magazines like Popular Mechanics or Mechanics Illustrated. Some of those old magazines, there's just dozens of engines. If you scan through those old magazines, there's dozens of engines, and a lot of them have the drawings right in the magazine. But they will say set the timing 10 degrees before top dead center. 5 to 10 degrees will work fine, but one of the things that determines timing, you have to be careful on this, is the gap in the points, because the points are mechanically operated by a cam. And if the gap is too big, it's going to throw off the timing of the opening, the timing of the spark. So this gap should be between 15 and 18 thousandths. You have a gap feeler gauge that you get for setting the spark plug gap, and the gap in the points is very important. 15 and 18 thousandths. I use 15 thousandths on these gaps, and I use the same gap on the spark plug, about 15 thousandths. Spark plug gap is perhaps a little bit less critical than the point gap. Check to make sure your points are clean and dry, free of oil. So put the spark plug back in. I'm going to snug it up. You don't have to kill this, right? Just snug it up to make a good seal on that copper washer. It's easy. Again, most of these engines, the cylinder head, the crankcase, I mean, everything is cast aluminum and they're very, pretty soft, okay? Be gentle and use the right tool. Don't use pliers. Scratch everything up. So we have our spark plug and our points, and the wire is all set up. Usually the wire here is use about 14 gauge wire for hookup. Seems to work the best. It's all mounted. We have our batteries. Show you now how to test the spark plug. Let's say we hook it up. Go ahead and hook it up here. And by the way, you don't need a drill up. The popular way right now is to use a drill to start. This is just a an electric drill. This is a 5/16 bolt. Cut the head off, thread it on a piece of wood cut with a door hole saw. I put a groove in it. The groove is for the belt. Now this belt could be anything 6 to 8 inch belt. This is a Hoover vacuum cleaner belt. Very durable. I've also used the O-rings from a home water filter system. You can get them in 6 or 8 inches and use one of those O-rings. It works really well. They're pretty stretchy rubber. Hoover vacuum cleaner belt works really well. So you just chuck this little gadget up in the drill, and you get a starter. So you get it all hooked up. Oh, and if you don't have a drill, or you can just, I have a piece of leather here with a, just a rope, a starter rope. You just wrap this up and pull it. The thing is, the tip of this rope, when you pull this through, the tip of this rope will slap you in the leg or slap you in the eye, or an observer close by. Tell them to stand back, because when this tip flips off the flywheel, it is a whip. It's a nasty whip. Okay, so it's not starting. So what's the problem here? All right. To get an engine to start, you need fuel, compression, and spark. If you have those three things, it will start. So the reason that didn't start is probably because I didn't choke it. It didn't have any fuel. So let's check the spark here. Let me show you how to check the spark. Real easy. You can do this in your car too. So with the battery connected, I'm taking the spark plug out. Again, be careful with your washer. I'm going to lay the spark plug on the cylinder head so that it's the metal part of the spark plug base, the threaded and nut part, is in contact with the metal of the cylinder head. It's got to be in contact with metal. Then what I'll typically do is turn the lights down a little bit, right? When that spark goes off, I can see it. Okay, so let's turn it over by hand. I've got the switch, the wires are connected. Let's turn it over by hand and see if we see a spark. Yep, definitely a pretty good little spark. Now these spark plugs are tiny, so the spark is not huge like a car. I bumped it. See that? You can also hear it. And I can see my top dead center mark, so I know it's sparking right at top dead center. I mark that mark with the Sharpie. So you've got good spark. Let's talk about troubleshooting a little bit. When you're troubleshooting, make sure you have those three things, right? Spark, fuel, and compression. First thing you want to check is your valve timing. When your flywheel comes up on your mark, the top dead center, check both valves are fully closed. And the way you can do that is, the spring is as wide as it gets. There should be a little play in the rockers. Now the specifications on this, on an auto engine, are set by the manufacturer of the engine, and you can just look in the book. When you find a model engine on eBay, there's no, you're on your own, right? So I found through experimentation, the engines are pretty tolerant of a loose, somewhat loose. But the best thing is to use a feeler gauge, and you want these about 3/1000ths of a gap between the stem, the top of the stem of the valve, and the bottom of the rocker where it pushes right here. See that? A little, so there should be a little play in there. And you can feel this is probably too much. I've got some wear here on the axle, or if you will. I'm not sure what the problem is here, but there's some play there. That's too much. This one's pretty good. The exhaust is pretty good. It's almost too tight. So there should be a little play in there. See that? A little bit of play. If the valve isn't fully open, if you're up top dead center, and you can see the valve is still compressed like this, then you're going to have to check your valve timing. And that involves the gears off the camshaft. We're not going to go into that here. That's a whole nother video. Check the valve is fully closed at top dead center if you don't have compression. Another thing is to bring it up where the valve is fully opened, and if there's a piece of dirt underneath the valve seat, you can sometimes depress the valve and let it snap up, and that will clean that out if there's a piece of dirt under the valve seat. Okay? Got compression. We checked our spark. We have spark. And now we have fuel. So we'll take the clamp off the fuel line. Now one of the advantages of using a clear fuel line like this model airplane fuel line here is that you can see the fuel coming in. You can see if it had bubbles in it. So check your fuel line. Make sure you're getting fuel. This particular engine, this old engine, had a carburetor float valve made of a cork. When there's fuel in the float here, in this little tank, it's a little float tank, like a Briggs & Stratton. The needle that sticks into the float, you'll be able to push it down and feel it pop back up, like that. So make sure you're getting fuel. Make sure the fuel line isn't constricted, twisted, pinched, hooked up. Check the fuel tank. Who knows? Maybe it all leaked out when you weren't looking. So I'll put a little fuel in here. Oh, this fuel, another thing. You can use gasoline. These engines were designed to run on, car gas. They'll run on unleaded, doesn't matter. What I use is Coleman camp fuel, Coleman lantern fuel. Now this is pretty cheap, this stuff here. This at Walmart, I think it's like $7.95 for a gallon. It says white gasoline, but I don't think it is actually gasoline. It doesn't smell as bad as gasoline. It's easier to clean off your hands than gasoline. But this is what I'm using for fuel. I've just put it in this bottle. This is often messy. You want to get the tiniest little funnel you can find. This is pretty small, but even it's too big. It's the smallest one I have here. So I'm just adding a little fuel. Now I did put about I put 4 or 5 drops of Marvel Mystery Oil. There we go. Okay, we got some fuel. I'm not going to fill it up because I'm not going to run it that long. Okay, here's Marvel Mystery Oil. You get this Advanced Auto Parts. This quart of this is about $7. It's good stuff. The late Clarence Lee, who was the authority on model engines, he wrote an article about model engines every month for years in Model Airplane News or RC Modeler. Clarence Lee recommended this stuff as after run oil. I use it in the crankcase. Use about half a teaspoon in the crankcase of this, and I add a few drops to the fuel. Even though it's a 4-stroke, I like that extra lubrication. Okay, so we've got some oil. Here's the little crankcase vent right here. They used to call this the breather before they had positive crankcase ventilation systems on car engines. So this is just a little cap. The cap has a hole, holes drilled in it for breathing. I've got a little Marvel Mystery Oil in a ketchup bottle. And I'll just put a little, make sure I have some in the crankcase. You can turn it over and the piston goes down, it'll pull that oil in. Okay, so I've got oil in the crankcase. Some of these engines, old ones, the larger ones, will have an oiler here, the old drip oiler right in this position because it's directly over the crankshaft. Okay, that's on there. Okay, so we've checked the ignition, we've got fuel. Fuel float valve is full. Fuel line's good. Fuel, ignition, and we've got compression. It's got pretty good compression, those 2 rings in there. So let's connect it up and see if it starts. Now, most model airplane engines and most engines run counterclockwise. A few of these magazine article engines run clockwise. This one runs counterclockwise. So set your drill to run the proper direction. A little bit of choke.